Roll the intro. Hey guys, I just wanted to pop in and give my 2 cents about 2021's Antlers. And independent from, a normal film review, again, I'm kind of going this at the angle of the native representation in the film. So let's get into it. And if you don't know already, the film is actually based off of a short story. The short story is called The Quiet Boy. It was published in the Generica magazine, I think that's what it's called, back in like 2019. And I'll go ahead and put a link to the short story in the description below. It's actually really good. And to quickly summarize, if you don't know, it's literally just about, a woman who grew up in a hometown in Oregon. She left for a while, has come back, and is a teacher. She lives with her brother and he's like the local sheriff. And she notices that one of her students is simply just acting strange. She starts investigating a little too further and shit hits the fan. But that's really pretty much there is to it. For the first part, I want to talk about the things I liked about a film. Now I'm gonna put on like my, my filmmaker hat, I guess. There were actually quite a few things about this film that I enjoyed. And a lot of that is the actual filmmaking, the craft of the film is actually really well directed. The cinematography by Florian Hofmeister, I think that's his name. The cinematography for this film is just borderline immaculate. The color grading and the camera angles and the choice of shot. Another thing along with the cinematography is it was composed by Javier Navarrete. He also did the score for Pan's Labyrinth, and because of it, the setting almost felt like a character because of the tone. And I really liked that. And the production design was actually really great. Lots of good practical effects and everything else. And the acting was actually really good. Kerry Russell did a great job with what she was given. Same thing with Jesse Plemons, and then Graham Greene, for the short time he's in it, actually did a pretty good job. And then the kid, Jeremy T. Thomas, is like he really did a good job. Like because I've worked with child actors before, and directing children it's something very hard to do for a director in any film setting, right? But this kid just really delivered and what he was given, and he did a really good job. So the acting was pretty much, on par. And so overall, like, everything was consistent. The tone was consistent and everything. It really was dark and depressing. That's one of the things I really enjoyed about the film. All right, now time to get to the meat of why you clicked on the video. The native perspective of this film. As many of you probably already know, the film it's a Wendigo story. And to start off, like if you've seen my last video, this film straight up copies the trope I made fun of in my last video. If you haven't, you can go back and watch it, it's at the beginning, but it follows it almost beat for beat. Like they go to a native character, they ask him about what's going on, he gives them exposition, and then he leaves. It's the exact same thing like I talked about in my video. And I was really hoping that Graham Greene's character, I was really hoping he would be more involved. But like in the climax or even in the fall off, nowhere to be seen. He's just not there. I guess right now I kind of wanted to touch on the Wendigo itself and more on its representation throughout popular media. And the one thing that I've come across for the most part, as far as I can tell, the bipedal stag zombie monster that the Wendigo is usually portrayed as is usually just a Western adaptation of the creature. So this is the hard thing because, again, it belongs to so many tribes up north and it's different for each tribe. That's the thing that's hard to nail down. For one tribe it means an owl, and for other it really does mean a cannibalistic spirit. For others it's a winter type spirit, or others it's an actual creature. So it is all over the place right now. Like with each tribe you talk to, the Wendigo is more of an archetypical figure. Trying to adapt it in a large scale, mass-produced commercial product is really hard to do. And unfortunately, the one that just comes to mind the most is just the Stag Monster. Again, I mentioned in my last video about this, and Until Dawn had like a weird lanky creature, so did Supernatural, so it's hard to tell where, it all really originated from. And it's interesting to think about how the Wendigo, it's been speculated that based on hearing about the creature, it was more, the stag bipedal creature is actually more inspired by the Greco-Roman pagan god Serenos. I think that's how you say his name. He's basically, he's got stag horns, and he looks like a man. And there's an illustration by a guy named Matt Fox in 1944. He did this illustration for a short story by Algernon Blackwood, and the story is called like The Wendigo. And so, you know, that's one of the first outward representations of the Wendigo, being like this stag helm-like creature. I feel, just by looking at the research I've seen, it's kind of word of mouth of how the creature is portrayed. But it's interesting how for this film, they really stuck to the whole antler stag helmed creature thing, you know, and I'm curious to see the thought processes behind that. I like the idea that it is a spirit, but it's a spirit that manifests physically and takes over people's souls and bodies. It's interesting to think about. Now, some of you may know or may not know, but the film actually had a lot of native input from renowned indigenous filmmaker Chris Eyre. He directed Smoke Signals and the PBS adaptations of Tony Hillerman's novels like Skinwalkers and A Thief of Time, and lots of other prominent indigenous films. I think he did Skins as well. And he was a consultant for the film. And Grace L. Dillon, I think that's her name. She's native, she's Anishinaabe, and she's a professor of Indigenous Nation Studies at Portland State University. So apparently she had a lot of input on the representation of the Wendigo. They got Margaret Nundin, who is a prominent Ojibwe linguist, who recited the poems in the film in the Ojibwe language.
He's not your responsibility.
He has no one. He is my responsibility.
He'll come for me. He needs me.
So like, you know, there was this attempt. There was a consultation. Scott Cooper, I'll link the article in the description below, but he basically talked about how he wanted to be respectful. He wanted to get it right, you know, and I don't know. This is the hard thing. Like, as someone who has been a cultural consultant on projects and is a cultural consultant on projects, I'm very curious to see if there was any push or pull from the studio to make certain things happen that maybe Scott Cooper or Grace Dillon or Chris Eyre felt were kind of weird, you know? So the things that I talked about, touching on earlier, like I talked about with the themes. Now the themes, at least one of them, is more inherent in the whole nature of how the Wendigo manifests. Now I'm gonna get into like spoiler territory here, so if you haven't seen the film, sure, go watch it if you want, but if you don't care, then I can just keep talking. But there is a more indigenous perspective of how the creature comes to be. And you know, again, it goes back to that idea of overconsumption and greed, oversaturation, you know, just taking too much of it. And also that's also manifested in, like, you know, in the film, it's mentioned many times that, like, you know, there's basically people who are addicted to meth or other drugs. There's actually a scene where we see the employment officer just has a long line in front of it. We see characters in the film making meth. It's mentioned that Lucas's father is a guy who's dabbled in meth or making meth. He's been arrested multiple times, right? The principal mentions that tons of parents of the children at school are often doing that type of thing. And it's also seen, or Kerry Russell's character, she is just, you know, she's tempted by alcohol like all the time. And so like, it's just this idea of taking too much or wanting too much, right? The film actually sets that tone with the poem at the beginning. That is in Ojibwe. And so it kind of suggests that with the lifestyle that the people are living, and then it also talks, you know, there's a radio host talking about new mining operations in the area. It kind of seems like the mixture of both the people and how they live, and then, you know, the mining operations of tilling the earth and taking too much of it is what manifests this Wendigo creature to arise. And it's interesting, you know, it's been pushed upon by so much in popular culture that the Wendigo manifests because of cannibalism. But what I thought was interesting about this rendition is that it isn't necessarily manifest because of cannibalism. it manifests because of all these things, and cannibalism is more of a byproduct. Cannibalism by nature, not necessarily like as metaphorically, but not necessarily literally, which I thought was an interesting take on this one. So I don't know where that specifically came from, but I had to think about it too much though. I didn't quite get that first time watching it. But I like that because it shows that the Wendigo doesn't only manifest because of cannibalism, because I think the whole cannibalism aspect of the Wendigo is kind of oversaturated. Everyone knows now that like, oh, the Wendigo manifests because of cannibalism, but I mean, for different tribes, it just could be simply greed. Now, so this is the main issue here that I'm trying to look past and look into the pre-production process here, but I'm gonna take a wild guess that with the cultural consultants they had and how this Wendigo is portrayed, I have a feeling it's one of two things. One, that this version of the Wendigo is specific to one particular tribe. It's like so specific, right? It could be that. Or it's an amalgamation of different tribal archetypes that create the Wendigo, and they kind of maybe created this one to be kind of its own thing, to avoid maybe making it to be from a specific tribe. Rutherford Falls and Reservation Dogs did two opposite things. Rutherford Falls, they make a fake tribe for the story. The Minishonka, like that tribe doesn't exist. But for Reservation Dogs, they don't even say the tribe. It's just an unknown tribe in Oklahoma. And you could guess like what it is, but it's unnamed, right? So I feel like with the depiction of this Wendigo, they might have went either one of those directions of either making their own or making a specific one, or kind of like this amalgamation of it. I'm not entirely sure. So I'd love to get a hold of Grace D. Dillon or even Chris Iyer and ask them like what that process was, and if there was any studio interference of how the creature is portrayed. And this is the thing, like, I'm not being critical of the themes in the film. I think those themes are actually very important. It's actually pretty relevant to today when, there's so much going on right now with us just not respecting the earth as much. However, my main issue is just kind of how the indigenous perspective of the main story overall and of the Wendigo is just kind of vaguely acknowledged and then just kind of pushed to the side. And like I said, like there is this sense of indigeneity spread throughout with the poem at the beginning, and the fact that like, we know the creature manifests from indigenous lore, right? But it has a hard time trying to justify its indigenous roots and perspectives in the film. And that's the thing too, like we're told how this creature manifests, but we're not exactly told how to get rid of what causes the creature to manifest. Graham Greene tells them how to kill the creature and they kill it, but like what is there, And like you could argue that maybe if they wanted to provide a solution to the issue, the film would turn into kind of like an activism for environmentalism or something like that. So we don't entirely know, and that's the thing that felt kind of weird. It has this native perspective on the surface, but deep down it just doesn't. And it's just about these characters that we just don't really care about. The only one I really cared about was Lucas, and even then it was hard to care for him. Kerry Russell's character, I just didn't care. By introducing these indigenous perspectives, it didn't really help all that much, honestly. It just kind of felt cheap. And that's the thing too, like I'm okay with unhappy endings. The Witch did really good with an unhappy ending. Same thing with Hereditary, right? But they had a catharsis. There was a buildup, there was promises, and then they paid off at the end, right? This one I didn't feel that. Like I knew eventually we're probably gonna see the creature. I knew eventually somehow we're gonna get like defeated or somehow, but there were all these little things trickled out at the beginning that were set up honestly very well, but like once it got to the end of the third act or the second act and into the third act, we just didn't get any of that. And it's unfortunate these kind of indigenous themes and perspectives were introduced, but the way that characters integrated it and how they just kind of shoved Graham Greene's character to the side, it just felt lackluster and honestly just kind of depressing. And that's the thing, like, these themes of like the trauma and stuff suggest that it's somewhat tied to the manifestation of the Wendigo, but it really isn't. It's just there to try to make us feel bad for her character, but it doesn't work. Again, the film tries to have us understand it from an indigenous perspective, but it just fails at that completely, unfortunately. And again, because of this, I have a gut feeling that maybe Scott Cooper pushed for one thing, but maybe the studio or maybe Guillermo del Toro said something. I don't know. I really don't know. Something weird happened just because I feel like the film just has a hard time trying to be something. So yeah, I don't know. I really can't say unless we figure out exactly what happened behind the scenes. So that's the gist of it is that there is an indigenous presence felt, but it's not really experienced. That's the issue with this film. So that's it. You know, I really wanted to like this film. It just didn't do it for me personally, and I'm sure that there might be other natives out there who will enjoy the film, but it just, for me, it just kind of fell flat. Not only just in story, but again, like, this is one of those films where the story is so ingrained with the lore, and they just kept kind of tugging at it, and it was just really hard to balance. And again, like, an indigenous perspective is there, but I feel like if the filmmaking went bold enough to try to utilize a completely indigenous perspective in the film, I honestly think it would have helped better with the story and the execution of that story. Again, like, this goes back to this idea that, like, it would be really interesting. We haven't had this happen, like a period piece like The Witch, right? Where we get a purely an indigenous experience and perspective of these cryptids or these supernatural events. It'd be very interesting to see, you know, an Ojibwe family or Ojibwe band, like, suffering in the winter and trying to get through the winter and having the struggle, and then, you know, with the Wendigo manifesting somehow. It'd be so fascinating to see that. But again, I don't want to shit on it too much. This is one tiny step in the mainstream direction from non-native filmmakers, and, you know, a decent direction. I won't take that away. They did their best with the consultation. They did their best to, like, be respectful. I understand. See, Scott Cooper has a record, especially with Hostels, of being sympathetic towards natives and, you know, wanting to be an ally. And I get that. Again, like, I'm judging this too harshly, but I'm mostly doing so because it's a non-native film production about natives with, like, some native input. I'm gonna be critical. So that's just how it is. And this is the thing, like, the Wendigo in the past in popular media, it has been used to critique colonialism, the overconsumption and excessiveness of colonialism. It did that in AMC's The Terror, and it did so in the film Ravenous. Those two films kind of both used the Wendigo as kind of like a metaphor for that colonial process. But the thing is like, these films are usually done from a Western perspective, from an American perspective. It comes from this more self-critical point of view of, you know, your typical white liberal American critiquing, you know, the conservative way of life, right? It's that same idea. And I feel like Scott Cooper's film work is that. That's the thing. I feel like Hostiles and this film are a white American's critique on white America's lifestyle. That's just what it is, and colonialism, you know. But like I just mentioned, we have yet to see a film that is, you know, from an indigenous perspective about indigenous things. And like, again, I appreciate how there are non-native filmmakers out there trying to kind of use native stories to advocate for us or, you know, critique American way of life. However, like, I think it's our time to start telling our stories and allow us to be critical of not only the American way of life, but even of ourselves. And it looks like we're gonna get something like that with the next Predator film. If you follow me on Instagram, I posted it on my story. The next Predator film is titled Prey, and it's going to be a period piece Predator film, which is something I think a lot of fans have wanted. I'm a huge Predator fan, and I've had been since I was a kid. But this one excites me because we're gonna see a native perspective, like before colonization, of a Comanche warrior facing off with a predator. And like, that's so cool, you know. And it's like, I wish we could get more of that from a mainstream studio, from Fox, you know, ultimately Disney, but like Fox is the original intellectual property owner. But like, that's just cool, you know. And I think, unfortunately, this is going to go into another whole topic of, you know, I want to talk more about like mainstream and independent representations of native media and stuff like that. But I just feel like if we had a Wendigo film with the same frame that the new Predator film is going to be in, It'd be very interesting, you know? So that's it. I talked way too much about this. It's more of a rant than anything else, but I think it's important to look at and critique these types of films from the native perspective. So not only me, so like I can learn, but we can learn, and hopefully other filmmakers can learn about things that worked and some things that didn't. So if I were to rate it on 0 to 5, I'd give it like a 3. I'd give it a 3. So that's it. I'm done with that. I'm trying to finish up my actual review of Reservation Dogs. I want to sit down and just kind of talk about all the little things here and there. And then I want to talk about Rutherford Falls. And I want to get into the nitty-gritties of that show because I think I enjoyed Rutherford Falls a little bit more than Reservation Dogs. But you'll have to watch and find out why. So that's it. Please subscribe, share with your friends. I'd love to hear what you guys think in the comments, and talk to you guys later.